Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, my friends. How are you all today? I apologize for the voice. I've been somewhat ill. Well, not ill, but I've got something that just bugs me in the throat of late. There's a bug going around. So I apologize for the voice, although some people do say it sounds nice. Go figure, right? So it is 11 o'clock in the evening, Saturday evening. And I was like, you know what? I really want to make this video. Um, so, as you guys can see, the title of the video is Why I Don't Wear a Wedding Ring Refuted. So, this is going to sound maybe. I struggled with how I was going to do this video, if I'm honest, because. Um, so, basically, what happens is a minister who I know is an exceptionally popular minister out in the United States. And he posted on his Facebook, which was then subsequently circulated, because he is essentially at this point he is a celebrity minister, right? And as you can expect with most celebrity ministers, you have eventually what forms is a sort of a cult of personality evolves around him. So that if you try to talk to him or anything like that, you actually can't talk to him at all. You get swarmed by his minions. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about this thing specifically is actually in some sense a personal thing with the minister. Not he doesn't know me from a bar of soap. I don't think he would remember me at all. But what happens is my history with this minister. So to put everything out in the open, so that everyone can be the judge for themselves, is for those of you that know my conversion story, you will know that I went from Christianity to atheism in my youth, and then I went from atheism to the New Age movement, and I delved in all sorts of pagan religions, and I eventually returned to Christianity. Now, in my return to Christianity, I had a friend from school who invited me to his church. We were no longer in school. We had already matriculated, as we do in South Africa. I went to school in South Africa, for those of you who don't know, even though I live in the UK now. Um, and he invited me to church, and at some point, he invited me to a camp meeting. So, camp meeting is something that North American Protestants do a lot of. And this particular camp meeting was of Seventh Day Adventists. Um, Seventh Day Adventists are well known for their interest in for those who know them. They're not actually very well known in general, but for those who know them will know that they're very interested in healthy living and the outdoors and all of these kinds of things, which is all good and fair enough. And so I went there, and I was at a point where I was already beginning to move over. I was sort of teetering between paganism and Christianity and all these sort of things. And I really didn't want to come back to Christianity. So I invited me to camp meeting, and I obviously rocked up, and I was dressed. I would dress and present myself in a manner that you would probably expect of a person who was in the new age. Um, very, very, very scruffy and sort of very hippie like, with a vest and with I looked a certain way that you could tell. And obviously, and now the problem is when you are amongst a bunch of religious people, you sort of stand out like a sore thumb. Now, generally, people were very nice to me, regardless, which is good. And then in one of the church meetings there, I went to a sermon which was preached by this particular individual who had been invited over from the United States, um, which is expensive, by the way. It's very expensive, um, at an unnecessary expense when you have local preachers that could do the same job, right? But every church in the world, not just Seventh-day Adventists, we have our little, we have your celebrity preachers who people like to fly around all over the place, no matter how much it costs in order to preach, in order to draw crowds and stuff like that. So I sat through his sermon, and his sermon was the sermon that pushed me over the edge to say, right, I'm going to commit myself to Christianity. So I owe him a lot for that, right? I really, really do. So no, people must not think of this as something that I'm doing because I've got ill will against the guy and stuff like that. But there are things that go on that people need to talk about because it puts a mark on the church, um and because celebrity ministers don't hear enough proper talk and truth from people in a constructive way. Because when you're a public figure, you either hear nothing but praise or you hear stupid criticism. You know, like those of us who are apologists on the internet, most of the criticism is totally idiotic. It's not criticism at all. It's just someone venting their spleen, you're right? So that's not criticism. So these ministers are obviously used to that sort of thing. But I doubt they ever hear really particularly constructive criticism, right? Um, and as it happens, especially if they become higher, people tend to kiss their boots and all these sorts of things. Not saying this is what happened. This is a kind of culture that often develops in churches in general. And so I was convicted, and I stood up and I'm like, yeah, I want to get baptized and stuff like that. And then me being me. Not familiar with any kind of protocol or anything like that, at the end of the sermon, at the end of the service, I sort of went straight to him in order to shake his hand and thank him for the message and everything like that. And I'd been convicted now to get baptized and all of these kinds of things. And he treated me quite badly, actually. Was very, very dismissive, right? And one of the reasons for that is because I had not realized that there was a line somewhere for people lining up to greet to him and talk to him and all that sort of thing. So it's really like celebrity like, and I just wanted a quick, thank you, and he was very, very standoffish. He was quite unpleasant. But by this point, I'd learned to be a little bit more gracious. And I realized, you know what, if the truth is the truth, whether I like the people in the church or not, sort of thing, right? And for a long time, I've managed to distance myself between, even if he's a total schmuck, is his message true? And so, I ignored it. And over the years, you friend them on Facebook and you see them talk. And it became apparent to me that this particular individual is extremely arrogant, very, very arrogant. He's very, very self-assured in his way of reasoning things, his interpretation of things, and it gets to the point then where you will notice when you're reading someone's writing, the way they write, when you look at their profile pictures, and these are things that I've picked up in studying psychology for a number of years, is you see something called pronoun density. It's I do this and I do that and I do the next thing. It's a sign of narcissism, right? It's a sign of arrogance. The person is beginning to become way too self-assured, setting themselves up as an example, even though they say otherwise, right? And then what happens a lot of the time is then a certain kind of legalism crops up into the church. Now this is a particular problem within the Protestant denominations, right? Because Protestant denominations have, because the Protestant tradition coming out of the Catholic tradition fell into rationalism and nominalism and all of these kinds of things, they left behind a lot of the spiritual practices and the spiritual nature of things, right? And so lacking that, the spiritual dimension, the more, for want of a better word, the more mystical dimension side of their tradition, of the tradition which was there for the first 1,000 more years of the church, then in order to try and retain some sense of holiness, some sense of something like that, they started to become puritanical, right? And essentially became legalistic, like the Jews. Yeah, because of the rationalistic tendency, they started to then want to define, you, just like the Jews did. But how many times can you wipe your backside on the Sabbath? How many, and all these kinds of things. And when you look at the history, for example, the Protestants, you see, even as early as John Calvin essentially became the tyrant of Vienna, where he would prescribe even how many pieces of cutlery you could have on your table before it became somehow sinful. And this is the kind of absurdity. And then later on, obviously, you then had the radical Reformation, because once the Reformation got going, it just got more and more and more absurd, and people just demanded more reform and more reform and more reform, and there was no end in sight. Obviously, because each one is reading the Bible for his own self. He gets his own ideas, he gets his own imaginations. He's completely divorced from the tradition of the early church, of the fathers, of the church fathers, and all these kinds of things. And so then it's off to the races. It's each man fully convinced that he's interpreted the scripture correctly, and no one can tell him otherwise. And then off he goes and sets up his own denomination. They become radical, they become agitative, and this is what happened in Europe. There was a lot of agitation, there was a lot of political problems, very political. A lot of stuff was very, very unpleasant. For example, if you study the relationship that the Protestants had with Henry VIII, it was, and the stuff that they allowed him to get away with just so that they could have political. It was really, really ugly. Even though Protestants generally ignore this sort of thing and tend to speak of the reformers as if they were nothing but saints who never, sort of thing, which is, it's not true. It's not true. Yes, they did good. Yes, there was pious men and all these kinds of things, but it always wasn't all peaches and cream. And so, lacking this thing, they become very, very legalistic and want to nitpick at all of these little things, and then completely miss the point, right? And you essentially find yourself with these people, sitting with these people, and you feel almost in many ways the way Christ did when he was talking to the Jews. It's like, you guys have missed the point here, and you've misunderstood what I mean about things, right? And you're just inventing hordes of unnecessary, stupid rules, and it becomes oppressive, and it becomes hypocritical. There's a lot of hypocrisy that then comes out. And so he published, and so all of that to say, he published um, a document or a post that says 30 reasons why my wife and I do not wear wedding rings. And immediately you see the issue there. Why my wife and I, if you're putting forth a proposition and stuff like that, you should say, listen, here's 30 reasons why you shouldn't wear a wedding ring, or something like that. But you start seeing the pronoun density and a lot of, and if you go through his, I'm not going to mention names and stuff like that, because that that would be inappropriate, of course. But if you look through his Facebook profile and all these kinds of things, there's a lot of selfies. There's a lot of he says one thing, but he's actually doing something else, and all that. And I'm going to bring all of these things out. And ladies and gentlemen, we gotta come away from this sort of thing. We really, really, really need to do that, right? So let's begin. Let's get stuck in. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through the list, and I'm gonna give a response to each point, right? To each point, and then at the end of the video, sort of towards the end, I'm gonna give you the actual history and the actual meaning behind wedding rings, right? Where, you know, what's this all about, right? Is this really something we should be concerned about? And what are we missing when we reduce it to such inane, such, when it just becomes like rank materialism and nominalistic in our thinking, right? Um, and one of the big things with Protestants is that the interpreting symbols and stuff like that is it's almost like a lost art with them, sort of thing, and it's getting worse and worse, I find. So here we go. Let's begin with the first one. Over here says it is never practiced or commanded in the Bible. All right, so it's never practiced. This is an absolutely irrelevant point, right? Um, he presupposes that. So the presupposition is, because the Bible is silent on the issue, right? Because here's the thing: he's assuming that lack of evidence is evident, is that that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, as they say, right? Which is false. It's a fallacious, right? And then it says it's never practiced or commanded in the whole Bible. So what? Who cares, right? This presupposes that people are not allowed to invent their own traditions, their own cultural nuances for their own personal, or private, or even for their communal reasons, right? This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous, right? It makes no sense. It's utterly irrelevant. Okay. Um. So here it is. It is not sacred or holy according to the Bible. Again, this is utterly irrelevant. This is basically 1 and 2 are essentially the same point. It's totally irrelevant. It's not sacred or holy in the Bible, which assumes that we can only do that which is sacred or holy in the Bible. Right? There's a lot of, we have that which is common and that which is holy. Our lives consist of a mixture of the two, right? Things which are common for everyday things, right? Our secular lives, as it were, right? I'm not saying that, and here's the thing, I'm not saying that needs to be a bifurcation between our spiritual lives and our secular lives. Obviously, our spiritual selves, our Christian selves, are supposed to permeate every single thing we do. But the fact of the matter is, despite that, a lot of the stuff we do, going to work every single day, whatever the case it might be, this is normal secular, mundane, regular stuff. You're right. So just because it's not sacred or holy in the Bible does, who cares? So what? This is not a reason to not do it, right? Especially if the thing is deep and meaningful between you and another person, right? This is utterly irrelevant. It doesn't have to be sacred in a religious way, right? For it to not have special significance in a personal way, right? This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Um, and so ladies, and so do you see what I mean by it's so? My concern is not only the legalism, but the utter lack of ability to provide sound arguments for things, right? And this is what becomes part of the oppressive nature, because atheists and pagans and all of these people, right? When we try to evangelize them, one of the comments they always say is that Christianity is oppressive, right? Now, that Christianity is not meant to be oppressive, but when people behave like this, right, their reasoning, their rhetoric, their willingness to impose restrictions and prescribe things upon you and force things on you is not limited by any consideration to laws of logic, to being rational, to making some kind of sense, right? So a person can just make things up, and each pastor and each person can develop his own sense of piety and force that upon other people, right? And this is why some people leave the church. Like, I can't stand it. I can't so much as blink in a different direction without some pretentious pietistic idiot casting his nose down at me, sort of thing, right? I'll give you a perfect example. This one time I was at a church, and this woman, right, she was the wife of the elder, is going on about how bad Coca-Cola is, right, or how bad coffee is, right? How bad and evil coffee is because Ellen White speaks against coffee, right? Meanwhile, she was drinking a can of Coca-Cola, right? This is the kind of absurdity that goes on, right? This is what this leads to. Okay? Then it says, it is a worldly custom. The world is not our example. It is a worldly custom, and the world is not our example, right? Now, the first, it's ridiculous. It's a worldly custom. So, right? So this particular individual, right? If you had to go onto his Facebook, you would find that he is involved on a lot of things that are worldly, that are secular, that have no religious significance whatsoever, and they are his hobbies. And not only are they his hobbies, but if you look at the equipment that he purchases, that is, and you can see, and this is the thing where you talk about, he's got a lot of selfies on his Facebook page. Looking at these selfies and looking at the kind of equipment and things that he uses for his various hobbies, he spends a lot of money. Believe me, he's not using cheap budget stuff. Okay, he's not using budget stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that even he does that is, I mean, it's worldly. So what? Our concern is not whether or not something is worldly or not. It is whether it is evil or not, right? Because to reiterate, we in our lives are a mixture of the secular and the sacred, right? When we go to church, when we say our prayers, when we read the Bible, when we do all these things are sacred, right? Marriage is sacred and all these kinds of things. And then we have the secular. When we go to work, when we participate in politics, when we go to school, and these are, right? Send your so you what? You're not allowed to send your children to public school because it's worldly, right? I mean, this is just so idiotic, man. It's that you struggle to understand how someone who can be such a powerful preacher can be this stupid, basically, can be this irrational and this ridiculous, right? And then it says the world is not our example. Well, no, duh. I mean, who's saying it is, right? I mean, it's a worldly custom dash. The world is not our example. I mean, the one is completely, it's a worldly, so what? And the world is not our example. Just because you're doing something that is worldly does not mean that you think that the world is your example, right? At all. I mean, come on. This is insane. This is totally insane. The Bible commands not to wear gold. This is partially true, right? This is only half truth. Okay, but we will get to that, right? We will get to that. The Bible commands God's people not to wear rings or jewelry. Again, this is the 4 and 5 are basically the same point, right? Basically the same point. Again, only half true, right? Because again, Protestants, what do? They interpret the Bible when it's convenient, obviously, when it suits their paradigm. They interpret it. The influence is hyper rationality and nominalism, hyper focus on a material, on a materialistic thing, and so that's the influence there, right? Number 6, it is the first step towards other jewelry, gateway jewelry. Even a simple wedding band makes way for a bejeweled one. you know, he's making a psychological argument, right? About what is a gateway, whether it was like the old, it's like the old thing where people said, oh, marijuana is a gateway drug, which is false, by the way, right? Marijuana and cigarettes, these things are gateway drugs. This is false, absolutely false, sort of thing. He's making a psychological point, and as far as psychology goes, he's utterly ignorant. He's a layman, right, at best, right? He has no basis for saying this at all, right? He's making a psychological point, and what is or is not a temptation for people varies utterly depending on the individual, right? Someone who is not inclined to wear jewelry is not suddenly going to want to wear jewelry just because they've got a wedding band. This is idiotic. This is nonsense. I've got a wedding ring. I never wear jewelry. I have no interest in jewelry, but I've got a wedding ring made out of tungsten carbide because I'm an engineer, right? I don't wear it because I've got ADD and stuff like that, so I never managed to get comfortable with it. It irritates me. So I have one, but I don't even wear it, right? So I refute this assertion, right? My very existence. This is absolutely nonsense, sort of thing, right? Different people are tempted by different things, right? And different personalities handle things in different ways and stuff like that. So this is abject nonsense. It really is abject nonsense of the highest order, right? Even and I would refer to you people that are thinking in these kinds of terms to go and read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, where he talks about whether Christianity is really the teetotal religion, whether we should consider that or not. And just because one person decides to be teetotal doesn't mean he should impose it on another individual, and so on and so forth, right? Go read what he says. He's very, very astute and very, very good, right? This is nonsense, sort of thing. His seventh point: God did not give Adam and Eve a band to wear. Again, it's utterly irrelevant, right? Utterly irrelevant. You know what God did give Adam and Eve? He gave them animal skins. Does this mean we must now go around in animal skins and reject everything else? Right? This is stupid. If the argument is valid, then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that then I can't wear anything that I'm currently wearing. I should go hunting and go and wear animal skins because God made them their first clothing out of animal skins. So now we must all wear animal skins all the time. All right? This is absurd. Pardon me. As a Christian steward, it is an unnecessary expense. So again, this is a prime example of hypocrisy. Pardon me. First of all, what is or is not unnecessary, you will find when you talk to this kind of person, is utterly subjective. Utterly subjective, right? What is or is not necessary usually is dictated by whatever pietistic sense of things that they have in their mind. Has got there's no objective reality here, right? Yes, as with Christian stewardship, it's true that we should be careful with our money, right? We shouldn't be wasteful and all these. Absolutely, perfectly true, right? It doesn't follow, therefore, that a wedding ring is an unnecessary expense. It does not follow at all, especially if the wedding rings are of a modest cost, right? So this is just a purely subjective assertion without any sort of thing. And again, when I say hypocrisy, if you look at his Facebook profile, he's spending money on stuff, a lot of money on stuff, when he could do the same thing with cheaper equipment, right? So, and this is something I've always found with people, and growing up in a culture that I have, where you get people who are very stingy, right? People who are very stingy, and those of you that have ever grown up with someone stingy, right, will know this. Will know this, right? For them, everything is an unnecessary expense. No matter how cheap it is, no matter how small the cost, for them, everything is unnecessary expense. Unless they decide to spend the money, then they can go and they can blow £10,000 on something absolutely idiotic, right? But it's fine because they said so, you see? Because they think it's a worthy thing, right? So more often than not, this idea, this question of necessary and unnecessary is usually very, very subjective. Now, I'm not saying that it cannot be made objective. You can make an objective argument for when a certain expenses are necessary or unnecessary and all these kinds of things, right? But when it comes to a wedding ring, right, you then on a little bit of a shaky ground. This is absolutely silly. Next point. It has pagan mythology in its origin. This is trash. This is absolute trash. It does not have pagan mythology in its origin. Our first, when we go into the archaeology, our first sort of indications that rings were in use at all whether for weddings or whatever the case, was the wedding ring of kings and nobles as a symbol of their authority, their political authority as a king, as a noble, whatever the case might be, right? Which means that, as far as we can tell, the most ancient use for rings was a secular role, right? Even though, yeah, they used to think that the pharaoh was a god, was a demigod, and all that kind of stuff, but it had a secular purpose, not a religious purpose, right? And then the ring, um, depending on the time, depending on the culture, and so on and so forth, would be used in different ways, would take on different meanings and stuff like that. And so now, not only is this basically a lie, sort of thing, and an irritating lie, right? It has pagan mythology and superstition as its origin, right? So not only is this a lie, it's a stupid lie, right? Because every single person now knows about it. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Halloween, every Easter, and all that kind of stuff, what do you get? You get all these things. Oh, this is pagan origins, this is pagan origins. Well, meanwhile, none of it is true, right? Because the problem with these people is that as soon as I don't like something, I'm going to claim that it's got a pagan origin. They can't be bothered to study the history. They're basically absolutely flipping ignorant about a thing, and they just claim it because it suits their paradigm. Just like atheists. Because also atheists love to say, oh, Christians are hypocrites because they're celebrating all of these pagan festivals, right? But again, they're too bloody ignorant to realize that none of these things are actually pagan. And you can talk to historians who would know, and you can trace back, well, was this a pagan origin or not? And the answer is no. It's not a pagan origin. Right? And so this is the same thing here. Now, here's another point of reasoning. Let's be logical. Let's see if we can be rational here, right? This is, again, the problem of this this lowbrow way of thinking within a lot of people, right? And a misunderstanding of the ontological status of evil, right? This is one of the big problems, right? The ontological status of evil, right? And sin, right? You see, because Protestants are divorced, have no connection to the early church, in the first 1,000 years of the early church and the way they understood things, right? They treat evil as if it has ontological status. Now, what does this mean, ontological status? Let me make an analogy. Think of the concepts of light and dark. With light, light has substance. You can measure light. You can produce light, right? I can produce a light bulb, a device that produces light, right? We say, God has light and all of these kinds of things. It is a substance, which means it exists. It is a real thing. It has ontological status. It is a thing. It exists. It has a substance, right? Whereas darkness is not a substance. You can't produce darkness. You can't make a darkness bulb or something like. Darkness doesn't possess substance. It's not a thing. Darkness is a state, is a condition, is a word that we use to describe a condition where there is no light. It's the condition where there is an absence of a particular substance. And it is the same thing with evil and sin, right? Sin is the movement of the will away from God, essentially speaking, right? Now, there will be some people jumping up and down and saying, oh, but the Bible defines sin as the breaking of the law, which is true, right? And breaking the law means what? It means that you're moving your will away from God, from the will of the Father. Your will moves away from God. And if your will moves away from the will of God, it means you will break the Ten Commandments and all kinds of other things, right? But evil and sin have no ontological status, right? This is why a lot of Protestants, when they like to ask, oh, where does evil come from? Or even, as if it is a thing. It's like when you see an object, oh, there's a cell phone. Where does the cell phone come from? Right? You imagine, because it is a thing of substance. What made it? Where did it come from? And this is why people are so confused. And when you realize that evil and sin have no ontological status, you then realize, well, then the answer is so simple, right? It simply describes the state of when angels and humans made the choice to turn away, to turn their will and their minds and their hearts away from God. That's it. And that's where sin is. And we then inherited, right, in the way we inherit personality traits and things of like that, right, through the ages, that propensity, that fallen propensity, right, we inherit that sort of thing. But evil is not a thing that, because it's got no ontological status, first of all, and if it is a movement of the will away from God, then something that doesn't have a will cannot contain sin, right? This is pagan superstition. This is the irony, right? To say that the wedding ring was invented. So let's, for the argument's sake, say that it's true, that the wedding ring was invented by pagans for pagan reasons, right? Therefore, we must reject the wedding ring. It's completely idiotic, because then it assumes that evil or sin or whatever it is possesses ontological status, and as such can be located in an object, in a relic, which then will invite some sort of thing into your life, which is not true. Only pagans believe that you can imbue things with dark powers and dark energies, and use that to spread darkness and stuff around. This is a pagan concept. This is not a Christian concept. Christians don't believe that evil has, right? It's pagan religions that say that there's a balance between light and dark. It is paganism that gives darkness ontological status, that gives evil ontological status, which is why in paganism you have evil deities, right? You have dark deities, right? This is a pagan concept. This is why in paganism you can imbue things with dark magic and stuff like that, whatever. This is not a Christian way of thinking. For Christians, evil and sin have no ontological status. It's merely the condition, right? What does the Bible call sin? Another way of thinking of sin is missing the mark, which means, what are you doing? It means you are not aiming. You are not aiming at the good. Your will has been diverted from God. Your heart, mind, and soul has been diverted, and you've done this willingly. It's been diverted away from God, and so you miss the mark, and you are unable or unwilling to fulfill and abide by God's law, right? It's not something that can be located in an object. And then this then makes a nut, and so then you realize that the minister is completely ignorant of this truth, right? Of this reality, that he's thinking more like a pagan than he is thinking like a Christian, right? And then another thing that he's ignorant of is that if you treat the object, so you say, right, here's a symbol. This symbol was invented by pagans, therefore the symbol is evil. Again, is rubbish, absolute garbage, because it assumes that a symbol has intrinsic meaning rather than extrinsic meaning. What does this mean, right? A symbol has no meaning on its own. It's just a shape. It's just a thing. It's not meaningful by itself. The meaning is imposed on it from the outside within a specific philosophical or theological system, right? Which is why, if you take the letters of the alphabet, right? And we can use these letters to represent the English language, or many hundreds of different languages out there, because the meaning is not intrinsic to the symbol, right? And even the sound A, right? We use a symbol A to represent the sound A. The Chinese and the Arabs, right, and the Russians have completely different symbols for the same sound in their language, which means the symbol is irrelevant, right? And this is where the ignorance is coming in. He's assuming that objects, that the meaning of the symbol is intrinsic to the symbol. It's not. Right? Which is why one of the big problems where you get this habit, right, which again with your your conspiracy theorists and a lot of Protestants like to do that. They watch a movie and oh, look at all that symbolism, and this is what it means. You have no idea what that symbol means. The only way you can know what that symbol means if you understand the philosophy which is using it. It's almost like a code. You cannot decipher a code unless you have the cipher, right? If you don't have the cipher, you can't decipher the code. It's just meaningless symbols to you, right? And it is the religion or the philosophy which is the cipher that helps you to understand the symbols. And Christianity is full of, symbols and stuff like that, and so this is where the nonsensical idea is. Even if it was invented by a pagan, so what? Right? There's absolutely no reason why over time the same thing cannot be given a completely different meaning in a completely different context, right? And if you disallow this, then guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Again, it's a question of absolute bloody hypocrisy. Because do the Christians not make the cross a symbol of Christianity? Yes or no? The cross was also used by pagans. The first ones to use the cross as a symbol were the pagans. So obviously, symbols don't have intrinsic meaning. They have extrinsic meaning. So if it's legitimate for Christians to get to take the cross on and give it and reinterpret it and give it a new meaning within our system, then it's legitimate for us to do this with any other symbol we want. Obviously, without being utterly arbitrary, right? If we allow the cross but we don't allow anything else, it's ad hoc, it's nonsensical, it's ignorant, okay? Absolutely ignorant. So these are things we need to think about, right? The Catholic Church adopted it from paganism and made it holy, not God. Again, this is another lie. This is another lie. So this is the problem with Protestants, right? If you don't like something, blame it on the pagan, blame it on the pagan origin, and blame it on the Catholic Church, right? This is the Protestant modus operandi. If I don't like something, blame it on pagans and blame it on the Catholics, right? The truth be damned, right? This is a lie. Okay? An abject lie. And I'm going to show you. Okay? I'm going to show you. And one of the problems is, again, because Protestants are so ignorant of history, they think before Protestantism, all there was Catholicism. And then sometime in the past, the church became corrupted and they became Catholics. So there was the early church, and then the truth was lost. The Catholics just perverted everything for all time until, the Protestants came to save the day. They have absolutely no idea that for the first 1,000 years of the church, there was no such thing as Roman Catholicism in the sense that we know now. No such thing, right? There was a one universal church. It was only at the schism and afterwards that, and because of the fight over the status of the Pope and all these kinds of things, that the Roman Church broke away from the global universal church and became its own peculiar thing in the West. Right? And so the meaning, and so here's just a quick little bit of history, right? In the West, we wear the wedding ring on the left hand, right? What is the reason for this? Is it a pagan reason? No. So the Greeks gave it, this is because of a romantic notion. It's a romantic notion. The Greeks started that practice, not for religious reasons. The reason the Greeks thought of it, put it on the left hand, was because the Greeks believed that there was a vein that ran from the finger to the heart. Why? Right? So it's not a pagan origin, it's a misunderstanding of anatomy origin, right? And so it was a symbol of love, and so we wear the wedding ring over there because it's a symbol of love, because there's the vein that goes to the heart. That's the reason. It was not a pagan religious reason. Yes, they were pagans, right? Just because they were pagans doesn't mean they did something for pagan reasons, right? No more than they farmed for pagan reasons. They farmed because they were hungry, because they need to eat food, right? Doesn't make farming pagan, okay? And so they thought, oh, this is a good idea. It's a bit of a romantic, and it's a romantic idea, right? But before that, where was the ring used? The ring was always used on the right hand. And if you go to the West, the ring is still used on the right hand. Not the West, the East. If you go to the East and most other parts of the world that are not considered the West, it's worn on the right hand still, for another reason. For the same reason that the kings used to wear it on the right hand, because it shows authority. And that's where the definition, the Christian definition, derives from. So, but we'll get there. So the Greeks started out this tradition of wearing it on the left hand to symbolize love. And then the Romans are like, yeah, this is kind of a cool idea. And the Romans adopted it too. And then it became ubiquitous, and it became a tradition in the West to wear it on the left hand. But prior to this, people were wearing it on the right hand, even Christians. Okay? Nowadays, because we know anatomy better, we know that there is no vein running to the heart. It's not true. Okay? So that's why. Okay? That's why we wear, it's because that's it. It's that simple. It's that basic. There's no conspiracy here. Okay? So yeah. And again, just because, and by the way, again, because the Catholic Church made it holy. The Catholic Church didn't make it holy. Marriage is holy. Not the ring, not the wedding ring. The wedding ring just represents the commitment. It's not the object itself that is necessarily holy in this kind of sense, right? And just because God didn't do it is irrelevant, right? Again, it presupposes this silly nonsense that we can't make our own traditions if we want to, so long as, right? Ladies and gentlemen, understand the following. You can make your own traditions, so long as they don't violate the law and the will of God. You're free to make your own traditions, right? In your family, in your community, whatever the case might be, right? We're going to get together once a week for, I don't know, to recite poetry to each other, sort of thing, right? That's a tradition. Why not? Okay? It's silly. Right, next one. Protestants historically rejected it. All right, so up till now, he's exhibited nothing but historical ignorance, and he does it once again. Protestants historically rejected it. This is false. It was the Puritans who rejected it. And again, they rejected the concept of extravagant rings. But do you know what the Puritans did instead? The Puritans would present their wife with a thimble. And you know what the wives used to do? The wives would cut the top of the thimble off, and they would wear it as a ring. So they didn't reject wedding rings in principle. What they rejected, because they were Puritans, was this extravagant expense of wedding rings and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the times, they rejected the ideology, where a lot of time, people buy wedding rings, these big fancy things, in order to show off, in order to be narcissistic and arrogant. That's what they rejected. They did not reject the wedding ring in principle, because their wives would turn the thimble into a wedding ring. Okay? So, yeah, and so, Protestants did not reject it. The Puritans did. Not all Protestants, okay? First of all, Protestants are not a monolithic thing, where that if you can see, oh, look, these Protestants over here rejected something, it means they all did rubbish, okay? And again, just because the Protestants accepted or rejected something doesn't mean that we should either, okay? Because, again, another point of hypocrisy. There's a lot of things that the early reformers believed that Seventh-day Adventists reject. So that just because some Protestant in the past either accepted or rejected something is irrelevant. especially to Seventh-day Adventists who reject a lot of the stuff that the early reformers believed, right? They don't retain the Eucharist, for example, like Martin Luther did, do they? They reject predestination, the way Calvin put it, don't they? All right. So if we're at liberty to reject and decide things for ourselves, then this point is irrelevant. It's asinine, right? And not and historic, and it's false. It is historically inaccurate. And even if it was true, it would still be irrelevant, right? Because then Adventists would have to abandon a whole bunch of their doctrines because they differ with some of the reformers. So rubbish. It isn't necessary and can be unsafe. Again, this is another stupid thing. We've already dealt with necessary or not. He's simply repeating himself. Can be unsafe. I mean, has he done a study to show that it can be unsafe? Right? Oh, I messed it up. And can be unsafe. This is, it's like someone is when someone hits rock bottom, right? They hit rock bottom, and then they're so desperate that they start digging. They pull out the jackhammer and start digging. This is how infantile it's becoming, right? Sort of thing. It can be unsafe. Do you have any idea how many things human beings do all the time that is unsafe? Right? The fact that something is unsafe is not an excuse to avoid it. And I mean, and can be unsafe. So this is just vague drivel, is what it is, okay? I believe the primary way we show how we are married is how we conduct ourselves. So what? Just because you have a primary way does not mean that you can't have a secondary way and a tertiary way or more. I mean, yeah, so what? No one disputes this. Who's arguing with this? That the way you conduct yourself is the best way to show you are married. Duh. Right? But is it the primary way in every single case, right? Let's say I go speak somewhere, right? And my wife doesn't come with me. Let's say she's got a different engagement somewhere else and I go alone, right? How exactly am I going to behave myself to show that I'm married? Please explain this to me, right? Because if I behave like a Christian, right? Think about this, ladies and gentlemen, right? If people would just take their little brain cells and click them together, right? If I'm a Christian, right? Pretend that I'm a Christian bachelor. Pretend I'm single. I'm not married. Pretend. But I'm a Christian and I must conduct myself in a manner becoming a Christian. Then guess what? Then my conduct should be indistinguishable from the conduct of a married person. Because just because I'm a bachelor does not give me license to behave inappropriately towards women, does it? So if a married Christian and an unmarried Christian are behaving in a manner that is godly, they should be indistinguishable in every way. Until, of course, you see the man kissing someone. Then that's his wife, right? So if I behave in a manner, so the only way in which I can behave to show that I'm married is by either, right, when I walk into a room, announce to everyone that I'm married, right, or show affection and to a woman in a manner that would be inappropriate for me to do with any other woman because she's my wife, kissing her on the lips and whatever the case might be, right? Otherwise, the behavior is indistinguishable. All right. So this is silly. This is ridiculous. The easiest way for another woman or man to tell whether you're married or not from a glance across the room is whether you're wearing a wedding ring or not. It's like that. Which is, in some ways, the point. Right? You can tell within 5 seconds. that, oh, well, the person's married. Therefore, if I find them attractive, I should then just, cool it off because they're unavailable. I don't need to know anything else about the individual, right? So this is ridiculous. This guy's not thinking at all. You know, a ring for a day. Weddings are just a day. Marriages for life. Is he trivializing the day of the wedding? Right, the wedding itself. This guy thinks like an atheist. Let me show you how. Atheists are like, the universe is so big compared to the size of the earth that, we are actually quite, and so his conclusion is that we are meaningless, that the earth is meaningless. Ladies and gentlemen, can you explain to me, right, why is it that size has anything to do with what is meaningful, whether small or big? All right, same principle, right? The wedding is just for a day. Doesn't matter if a wedding was for 10 seconds. Since when does duration have anything to do with whether something is or is not meaningful? Make my point? Perfect. All right? He's reasoning like an atheist, right? Marriage is for life. Well, duh. Which is why you wear the wedding ring for the rest of your life, isn't it? Hello? I mean, it's just, that's why, yeah, anyway, never mind. It's a dumb, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. No one in the Bible wore a wedding ring. Well, how do you know? You don't know this. You have no idea whether this is true or not. Okay? And again, absence of evidence is evidence of absence. It's a fallacy. It's a lie. Right? Here's an interesting talking about no one wore a wedding ring, right? So let's have a look. See here. Let me show you something that I'm sure most people have forgotten, including him, right? Now, let me put the story. Remember, Abraham wanted to find a wife for Isaac, and he sent his servant off to find a wife for Isaac. Remember, and he eventually found Rebecca. What did he do when he encountered her? He pulled out two gold bracelets and a nose ring. Right? Genesis. Right? Genesis 24. And Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out towards the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, thus the man spoke to me. He went to the man, behold, I was standing by the camels at the spring, right? So there we go. Right, speaking on our heart, please let us drink, right? I bowed my head. Right. So where's the other one? So it goes on to say, I bowed my head, worship the Lord. Right. So here we go. She said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. Right. He says, no one ever did it in the Bible. Right? Okay, let's grant him the validity of the argument. So if it's in the Bible, we're allowed to do it, but if it's not in the Bible, we're not allowed to do it. Okay, so would it be legitimate for me to exchange the wedding ring and instead give my wife a nose ring and bracelets? Right? They did it. Abraham did it. Rebecca did it. All right. So this idea that certain kinds of objects, wedding, marriage associated objects and things is not in the Bible is garbage. Right? That a minister does not know this, does not see this, should startle you. All right. So no one in the Bible wore a wedding ring. Well, even if this is true, it's irrelevant. This is so stupid. Rings have not stopped one act of adultery or fornication. Ladies, did you know that? Did you know that weddings have never stopped men from cheating on their wives? What a revelation. I mean, this is just, I mean, yeah. And who other than the most dim-witted person on the planet would believe otherwise? Right? That's not that's not what the wedding ring is for. Right? No one believes that a wedding ring has magical properties that suddenly makes it impossible for you to cheat. I mean, this is absurd. I mean, where does this guy come from? Has not stopped one act of adultery or fornication. All right. Wedding rings have never stopped adultery or fornication. Never. Not once. Therefore, we should get rid of them. Oh, by the way, the commandment that says thou shalt not commit adultery has never stopped anyone from committing adultery. Therefore, we should get rid of it and throw it away. Do you see how stupid this reasoning is? If the argument is legitimate, then it reduces to absurdity. It's nonsense. So this is someone who has the attention and the minds of thousands of people, who preaches all over the world for a fee, right? Back in the day, before I grew a brain, I attempted to invite him to my little church to preach because he's a powerful preacher. Maybe we could get something going there, right? You will pay for my accommodation, you will pay for my flights, which is all good and well, and you will give me a handsome fee to come for the weekend, right? Sort of thing. So yeah, let me tell you, this guy is making more in 2 days than some people make in a month. Okay, on those fees. So that might tell you something. Rings do not hold marriages together. God does. Well, again, same stupid as that. No one's stupid enough to think that rings do this, so it's irrelevant, right? It's what you call, it's in logic. I think it's a non sequitur. It's a fallacy of irrelevance or relevance. So what? You know what I'm saying? Going to church has never prevented anyone from becoming an atheist, so stop going to church. It's a stupid argument. My country does not require or obligate anyone to wear it. What? So your country is now allowed to dictate your religious traditions? Really? Is this where we're going to go? Now, here's the thing, right? I know that he opposed COVID vaccine mandates. So, which is a good thing, by the way, right? In that regard, he has some common sense. And ladies and gentlemen, please understand, just because someone is stupid in one way doesn't mean they are stupid in general, okay? So I'm not trying to say that this guy's a bad person or whatever. What I'm saying is, in this regard, he's a bit dim-witted, a bit arrogant, a bit narrow-minded, sort of, and a bit pretentious, right? We all have our flaws, sort of thing. And unfortunately, I think his celebrity sort of is not been good for him, right? Sort of thing. But I mean, I'm quite happy to confess, that, I mean, like I said, he's a powerful preacher and all these kinds of things, sort of thing. So he rightfully opposed the COVID vaccine mandates, right? Sort of thing. So, and then he goes and makes a statement like this: well, my country does not require it or obligate anyone to wear it. Well, they shouldn't, and it's irrelevant. Biblical modesty speaks against jewelry. No, it does not speak against jewelry. What it's actually speaking about is how we treat it, and I will get into that later because there's actually good theology in there. Right. I cannot consider it functional as glasses, watches. Oh, look, he includes watches. Yeah. Guess how much his watches cost? Right. By the way, by the way, the Puritans would have excluded watches. Good sir. Right. So if the Protestants' argument is legitimate against things like watches and, because a watch is jewelry, right? Sort of thing. The Puritans would have been against watches as well. Right. So do you see the hypocrisy? Do you see the double standard here? The inconsistency, the incoherence, right? He allows what? Oh, because it's functional. Yeah, it does one thing. It tells the time. You don't need to. I don't own a watch, for example. I don't own a watch. Right? It's not necessary. Right? Is one of his incessant arguments. It's unnecessary. A watch is not necessary. Right? Most of us have cell phones. Put an alarm clock on you. You don't need a watch. All right. So this is incoherent hypocrisy, right? And the irony of things, later on, he shows a lot of concern about trying not to look like a hypocrite. We'll get there. Well, the next one. It appears as hypocrisy when one preaches against ornaments and jewelry as the Bible directs, but still wears the ring. Well, it's only hypocrisy if you teach nonsense. And for someone who's so concerned about hypocrisy, he doesn't seem to be, he's oblivious to the incoherence of some of the rest of the stuff that he's taught. Specifically, watches are okay because they're functional. Sorry, brother, but if you're preaching against ornaments and stuff like that, someone's going to look at you and say, guess what? Your watch is jewelry, is considered jewelry. Watches, you see, the thing is, just because it's functional does not mean it's not jewelry, right? Watches are jewelry. Okay? Watches are jewelry. So if you're wearing a watch, people are going to think of you as a hypocrite, right? They're only going to think of you as a hypocrite if you teach something incoherent, if you teach it in this absurd, absolutist way of things, right? A person is more likely to think of you as a hypocrite for wearing a watch than for wearing a wedding ring. Because again, just because a wedding ring is jewelry, everyone everywhere understands that this is a sacred symbol for a sacred thing. And so everyone everywhere, even if you are in principle against the ostentatiousness of jewelry, right? No one would question you wearing a nice simple wedding band at all. But they sure as hell would think of you as a hypocrite for wearing a watch then, which he allows, right? Not to mention some of the other stuff but yeah, I'm not going to tell you who he is, but it's a total stupid just arbitrary standards. My example to the flock should be setting the ideal Christian behavior and lifestyle and not creating a stumbling block. Right. How about concerning yourself with coherence first? How about being coherent? How about not being arbitrary? How about knowing what you're talking about before you say it? Right? How about knowing your history first? Right? Excuse me. Right? How about developing the mind and reading the history and all that kind of stuff? Instead of running your mouth off as if you have a clue. Right? This entire thing sets a bad example, but you're worried about setting a good example by not wearing a ring with all of the other more egregious errors that you've exhibited here, right? You worried about setting a bad example because you wear a wedding ring, something that represents your holy matrimony between you and someone you love? Really? And this is another thing, right? There's two types of people out there in the religious world. You have the apologists who are constantly in a face-to-face battle with non-believers, right? And then you have preachers who sit in their ivory tower little thing and they think they understand things, right? Those of us who deal with atheists and stuff all the time, we know what they think is hypocrisy. In fact, some of us, you were atheists. We know what does or does not look like hypocrisy. Okay? And in this, you can see that this particular individual is utterly disconnected from reality. If he thinks that an atheist is going to take issue with you because of your wedding ring, rather than take issue with you, right, because of the stupid amount of money that you charge for your speaking engagements, right, or the amount of money that you spend in your hobbies, or the amount of money that you spend on your watches, right, or when you come with the rhetoric of what is necessary and unnecessary, but you're standing up at the pulpit in a suit and tie. Is a tie necessary? No. Does the tie have pagan origins? Guess what? Freemasons love the tie, don't they? Sort of thing. But it's irrelevant. The tie is one of the most useless items of clothing ever invented. But he wears one. Right? And he's probably got more than one. So trust me, right? If you're worried about looking like a hypocrite, right, then you're worrying about the wrong thing. Okay? Not only that, but non-believers will be put off by this legalistic pretension. Look at me and my wife and what we do and how holy and righteous we are. And this is why we do it. Okay? My example to the flock. Yeah. His example to the flock because he's a minister. But yeah, in this case, you know, there's a lot of good examples he could have set, and he completely failed to set them. The circle of eternal bond is not a biblical teaching, but from pagan again, this is garbage, right? Sort of thing. Symbols are extrinsic, not intrinsic. Even if some culture somewhere did have this kind of teaching, right? So again, he just simply assumes all cultures, all religions everywhere that use the wedding ring will use the wedding ring in this context. It's garbage, right? Just because some culture somewhere that was pagan used the wedding ring and imbued it with that specific meaning is utterly irrelevant to us. Completely irrelevant to us, right? And as we saw earlier on, he clearly does not know how to distinguish between thinking like a pagan and thinking like a Christian, because he thinks like a pagan, right? Remember when I was talking about the ontological status of evil, right? So he doesn't even know the difference, and he's trying to tell other people what is or is not pagan. He's got no clue. And it gives a false testimony. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, right? Again, this is stupid. It's the same fallacy that he's already committed twice before. High divorce rates prove rings do not prevent marital decay. Irrelevant. No one believes otherwise. Okay. It was anciently used to show possession of the wife by the husband, and men didn't wear the wedding band until the 1940s. This is a lie. Another lie. First of all, was anciently used to show possession of the wife by the husband. This is not true. This is a lie. Whilst some cultures obviously believed that women were possessions, right? What different cultures meant by possession was very, very different, right? For example, in the Jewish system, if something belonged to you, it meant you were responsible for it. So the Bible has an example, does it not? It says, if your oxen goes out and does X and Y and Z, then what? Then you are subject to certain penalties and this and this and that, because you are responsible for the ox, because the ox is your property, right? And so it was the same thing with family. It was this, and so for in the olden days, because they didn't have the moralistic, liberal, right, French Revolution philosophy and pretensions that we have today, Just because something was considered your property does not mean that you are objectifying the person at all. What does the Bible say about a man and woman? I'm married. Am I allowed to deny my wife access to my body? The answer is no. And she's not allowed to do the same either. The Bible talks about that men and women are not, that husband and wife are not allowed to deny each other sex and all of these kinds of things, except in very specific situations for religious reasons. We can abstain, but I have no right to deny my wife my body. Why? Because when we get married, the two of us become one, right? And therefore her body belongs to me as much as my body belongs to me, and my body belongs to her just as much as belongs to her. My body becomes the property of my wife, and she's the only one who's allowed to have access to it. Right? So just because the word, and so this, right, you can see he's been influenced by feminist rhetoric, by feminist revisionist history, right, who imagines that just because some X was property of Y, that this meant that there was oppression, this meant that this was subjugation, it meant that this was whatever the hell it is that feminists love to go constantly harp on about. But it's garbage, right? And it's because of the same idiotic understanding, this uninformed understanding, that atheists find reason to criticize Christians because of how the relation was between husband and wife in the Old Testament. And in Christianity in general, where the wife needs to submit to the husband and all of these kinds of things. It's because this kind of idiotic understanding. Because the wife, even in the Jewish thing, was the property, right? And so were the kids of the husband. And the reason for that, why? Because that is how, in the old days, that's how they made you responsible for a specific thing. Right? So if I go out in the street and I see a woman is destitute, I ask a woman, who is responsible for you? And if she says, so-and-so kicked me out of the house, what would happen? I go over there, I pull him up by the scruff of the neck, and I say, excuse me, you are responsible for this woman. What are you doing? And then he would be liable. He would be subject to punishment. Right? Not all cultures were like that, of course. Some cultures treated women really, really badly. Right? For example, I read a book, right, the other day, The Living as an Ancient Person. It was a fantastic book. Let me see if I can find it here quickly for you on my audiobooks. So the other side of history, Daily Life in the Ancient World by Robert Garland, right? The Great Courses, right? The Great Courses is a series of books. Is a series of audiobooks that are basically university lectures that given by a professional in history. So yeah, man, the women were treated really badly in some situations, but in other situations they were not. Okay? At all. So this idea that possession, whatever sort of thing, and even in the Greek culture, that actually did that, where the status of woman was very, very low, right? The wedding ring was a sign that the woman had authority to exercise certain things in the household running of a husband, right? So having a wedding ring was actually a good thing for a woman in those days. Was actually a very, very good thing, because she could go to markets and she could exercise authority on her husband's behalf, right? It was actually a very good thing. Not actually a sign of oppression. What was oppressive was the cultural philosophy that surrounded how men viewed women. It had nothing to do with the wedding ring. If anything, the wedding ring would exalt the status of a woman. Okay? And then also, it says, men didn't wear the wedding band until the 1940s is another lie. Different cultures in different types and places did different things. In some cultures, women were the only ones that wore wedding bands. In other cultures, only men wore them. In other cultures, both. Right? And the reason why men in the West only started wearing wedding bands in the 1940s was because of the World War. Right? Where the men going off to war, they wanted to have a token, from the one that they loved, from the one that they were leaving behind, because they did not know whether or not they were ever going to see them again. And so that's when men adopted the wedding band, because they would have a reminder of the loved one that they were leaving behind. And that would give them strength, and that would give them peace when they were in the trenches, on the front lines of the war. So guess what? Tell me something. Was the wedding band in that situation necessary or not? You tell me. Right? Was the only source of peace and comfort that some of these men had on the front lines, who were in absolute bloody hell because of the war. Right? Seeing their mates die left and right, and left, right, and center. Right? In the cold, in the muck, in the squalor. Right? And this was a source of comfort, so that they could be reminded about what they were fighting for. You tell me whether or not that is necessary. You tell me whether or not that has anything to do with bloody paganism. Okay? That this is now some gateway to jewelry and all this kind of garbage. What an honorable thing. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful symbol. What a beautiful reason to wear the wedding band. That's why men started wearing it. As a token of their wife when they went over to war. And was it functional? Of course it was functional. It gave them comfort. It brought them comfort in that situation. Which goes to say, do you have any idea, till this very day, how much comfort the wedding band brings to some people? Right? Men, those of you, right, who are too stupid to understand the nature of your wives, go and ask your wife, sweetheart, on those days where you feel unloved, right, where you're feeling unloved, maybe you're feeling a little bit insecure, maybe you're feeling a little bit low, because, newsflash, gentlemen, sometimes women feel that way through no fault of their own. They just feel that way. And ask her if looking down and seeing that wedding band, and it's like, oh, you know what, someone loves me, if that does not bring her comfort and solace and peace. There's millions of women out there who find that comfort and that peace. In that moment, that's the only ray of sunshine, where they look down at that and they're like, someone loves me. It's this tangible, because sometimes we need a tangible reminder. We're human, right? We're human. That's just the way we are. So you tell me whether that is unnecessary or not, whether that is not functional. Believe me, that's more functional than your stupid watch. Okay? It's disgusting how some men think. Someone who's so worried about, it shows a men possessed woman and stuff like that. It's obviously got a doesn't seem to understand woman very much. Feel sorry for his wife. Right? Some people have a godlike attachment to it. So what? Okay? What some people do is completely irrelevant to me. Okay? Some people have a godlike attachment to spoons. Must I now start using chopsticks? Right? Give me a break. A teacher is touching on the first and second command. Well, as long as I'm not doing it, I'm safe. Thank you very much. It's irrelevant. Some people do it. Right? Some people have a godlike attachment to their church building. Does it mean we should demolish the church building? No. The fact that same-sex couples wear wedding rings show how anti or non-religious the practice is. Again, this is retarded, right? What it shows is that same-sex couples don't give a damn about the sanctity of marriage. That's what it shows. It's got nothing to do with the ring. This is ridiculous, right? The fact that same-sex couples wear wedding rings show how anti or non-religious the practice is. This is so stupid, it's ridiculous, because, first of all, many same-sex couples are religious. So you cannot say that same-sex couples wearing it shows how non-religious or anti-religious the practice is. This is demented. This is absolutely idiotic. If you think about how many gay people who get married are also religious, and not just Christian, but Hindu and whatever the case might be, right? This is ridiculous. This is so stupid. It short circuits my brain how how not only wrong this is, but how irrelevant this is. Show how anti-religious the practice is. Really, come on, give me a break, right? So someone has managed to pervert my tradition, therefore it shows how it's anti my tradition. Really, come on. It's how many how many cults, how many Christian cults, insane Christian cults out there are out there perverting Christianity? Does that show, oh, that Christianity is false? No. This is dim-witted. The wearing of a wedding band falls under the category of tradition of men by the Bible standard. Again, this is a lie. This is a lie. First of all, if the church establishes a tradition, then it's not a tradition of men. It's a tradition of the church, and the church has been given authority by God to establish certain things or not, right? Again, you would understand this if you had any connection to the early church and to the church fathers at all, first of all. And second of all, just because something is the tradition of men is meaningless, right? Because the problem is not the tradition, and the problem is not the tradition of men. The problem is traditions of men that violate the law of God, right? But if I invent a tradition in my family because I'm the head of the home and I have the authority, right? I have the authority to establish traditions in my home, whether or not they're biblically endorsed. I am fully within my right to do so, to establish traditions within my home because I'm the father, so long as the traditions never violate the law of God. If the traditions do not violate the law of God, I have the authority to establish new traditions in my home for whatever reason. Again, right? Every Wednesday, the family's going to get together and we're going to read together, or we're going to, whatever tradition it is, we're going to get together and we're going to have dinner together, or we're going to have tacos, whatever the hell it is, right? Just because it's a tradition of man does not mean it's a bad thing. This is just, again, one of those reductionistic, nominalistic sort of ways of reading a passage that just misses the point entirely, right? Is reading the Bible like a Jew rather than like a Christian, or like an atheist, because this is the kind of way an atheist would read the Bible. This rigid, ridiculous way, right? Many have shared with me how the ring has increased flirtation from the opposite sex, rather than decreased it, as they assumed. Ironically, being a pastor in a position of a power and authority has also, so here we go. So, I mean, he's actually, so if this is an argument, then he should resign from being a pastor. Actually, it has nothing to do with ring, but what being married symbolizes or signals to onlookers is that you are married, rather than not wearing it. Okay, so why even bring this up? He knows. So this same principle, this is literally the same principle, irrelevant like other ones. So he sees it here, but he doesn't see it in other ones. So why even bring it up then, right? Increases so because some women are sluts, because some men are dishonorable, so what? Right. Last one. With the biblical institution of marriage under attack, I chose to get back into the Bible. Again, this is pretensions. This is presupposing that his interpretation has any validity of all. And you see this in Protestants all over the place, right? Oh, I choose to get back to the Bible. It's like, sorry, mate, right? It's presupposing that your reading is correct. And if it's not correct, then what have you done? You've done nothing. By the way, you're a man. This is your way of interpreting it. It's a tradition of men. So sorry for you. By your own standards, I need to ignore what you say. It's garbage. And then he goes, so anyway, right, we're gonna forget about the rest because it's irrelevant and annoying sort of thing. So that was his 30 points. Right. So ladies and gentlemen, where does the ring come from? What does it symbolize? If we go back to what I said before, in ancient Egypt, and traditionally the ring was worn on the right hand, was a symbol of authority. Now, the marriage unit is triadic. It recapitulates the Trinity. The Father, the Mother, and the children recapitulates the Trinity. Yes or no? Yes, it does in fact do. It does in fact do that. Okay? It does in fact recapitulate the Trinity. Now, let's have a look-see here at some nice, interesting little Bible verses. Okay? Just to see what we can find. All right. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. So Pharaoh shows favor to Joseph and puts him over his kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, is it or is it not? Is Joseph not a type of, not only is he a type of Christ, all right? Joseph is a type of Christ, right? Because Christ eventually also gets elevated to the right hand of the Father, right? But Joseph is also a type of us, right? We eventually, finding favor from the Father, does he not set us up and put us in charge of the world through Christianity? Do we not become stewards of the entire world? Yes or no? Through the church, right? When in the marriage, is the father not the head of the wife, the same way that the Father is the head of Christ? The father, the father represents Christ. The mother represents Jesus Christ. So the father represents God the Father. The mother represents Jesus Christ. It's playing the same role in the Trinity. The marriage recapitulates the Trinity. So this is where the tradition in the West, in the Christian church, this is what the wedding ring is trying to show. It's that transition of authority. So the priest would give a ring to the couple, and the couple would give each other a ring which they would wear on their right hand. I receive authority from the priest, because what do we do when we get married? What do we do? Who gives you the ring? Who holds onto the ring? All right, you have the ring bearer comes, gives the ring to the priest, and then the priest gives you the ring to give to your wife, and then gives your wife the ring to give to you. We are recapitulating the Trinity here, are we not? And this is where it comes from. This is where the tradition comes from. This is the meaning of the tradition within the Christian church, right? I'm giving authority to my wife, and she's giving authority to me. And the priest, who is a type of Christ, is giving authority to us, to establish our own little kingdom, which is our own little family. And this is why the wedding is so important. Does the Bible not talk about Christ being the bride and the church being the bridegroom? Does not the concept of marriage constantly show over and over again? And we have this constant symbolism in the Bible, not only with the signet ring, but with the right hand. The symbolism is all over the place in the Bible, and all of this was taken and inculcated into the wedding ceremony for us to recapitulate the triadic motif. The relationship between God the Father and His Son is recapitulated in type by, antitype in the man and the woman in the marriage union. It's the same thing. Right, let's go to another one. Esther spoke to the king, pleaded for compassion. Oh, hang on, there we go. Mordecai came before the king because Esther had disclosed what he was to her. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Right? So the king represents God the Father in a type. Esther represents what? Represents the church. And Mordecai represents sort of the members of the church. sets him over the house of Haman. Are we not? He's almost like the priest over the church, right? So over here, the relationship between God the Father and the church, right? And our responsibility over the church, and the church as steward over the house of God, the members, and especially the priesthood and all these kinds of things, because the Bible says, we are now a royal priesthood, right? Are we not? It's this responsibility. This is what it is. It's what's repeating this here, right? That's for Christians in Christianity. For the first 1,000 years of the church, this is what the wedding ring means. This is what the ceremony of marriage is recapitulating here. It's triadic. It's recapitulating the Trinity and the relationship between the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and as well as the relationship between the Son and the Jesus Christ, the Son, and his church, where the Father, right, the Father gives to Jesus the church as his bride. So in the marriage, right, that's what sort of the priest is like God the Father is like Christ, and the wife is like the church in that little ceremony thing there. And so the triadic, and so this relationship gets repeated in the marriage in many different ways, over and over and over and over again, right? I mean, here's another one. I will take you, O Zerubbabel, my servant, son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and I will make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Again, I make you like a signet ring. So he's giving him what? Authority. He's giving him authority. Right, so we'll get to Hezekiah. And it's even the same thing here, right? In the story of Abraham. Abraham has a son, Isaac, right? The son Isaac is at different times, typologically speaking, represents us and represents Christ. God the Father, or God says to Abraham, Abraham, take your son, your only son, and sacrifice him. In that moment, the son, Isaac, represents Christ. But then he goes and he takes Isaac to the thing, and Isaac is spared, and instead the ram is sacrificed. And in that moment, Isaac represents us. We are spared, and instead the ram is sacrificed. So the ram becomes typologically, right? And now Abraham says, hey, my son needs a wife. My son needs a wife. He needs a bride. Again, Isaac typologically is Christ here. And Rebecca is the church. And she's called on. She's given the jewels and things like that. And he says, will you go? And she wastes no time. I will go. And this is the attitude that the church should have. Rebecca is the church, typologically speaking. Okay? This is where, in Christianity, this is what the tradition of the ring and the marriage ceremony is. In that moment, when we exchange rings and all these kinds of things, we should see from the priest, God the Father is giving me authority to establish my own little kingdom, because I'm now head of a home. This is a big responsibility. I'm taking the role of the father, of God the Father, and my wife is taking the role of Christ. I mean, this is a big deal. We are recapitulating the whole thing. This is suffused with meaning, this event. And when we give the ring, it's the sign. The priest gives the ring. It's a sign. I'm granting you authority. to establish your own kingdom here, your own small kingdom here, your own family. Not even small kingdom. I mean, God intended that we have big kingdoms with large families, didn't he? It's like, go and multiply, right? This is what is supposed to be present in our minds. I mean, this thing is so stupid. I mean, it's like he says that the ring shows how, and that the fact that gay people use rings shows how anti-religious it is. It's like, why is it then not the same for marriage? If gay people can do it, then it's the same thing for marriage. But obviously not. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And these are the things that we are designed to be remembering, right? Is that giving authority. That's what we're doing. I'm giving my wife authority. She's giving me authority. And we become one. And so we do become each other's property. I must treat her like I would treat my own flesh. This is not a bad thing. Unless you're a feminist. Right? And so the question then is, but what about jewelry? Doesn't the Bible speak against wearing jewelry? Sort of thing. Let's quickly go here to Hezekiah, see what happens. So, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent envoys with letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he heard Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah welcomed them and showed them all his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oil, his armory, and all of that was found in his storehouse, and so on and so forth. What is he doing? He's showing off. He's showing off. Then Isaiah the prophet came and said, what do these men say? Where they come from? They come from the far country, from Babylon. What have they seen in your house? And Hezekiah, they have seen all that is in my house. There's nothing in my storehouse that I not show him. Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that was in your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. And then later on, when we go to the New Testament, it says, let not your adornment be with jewels and this and this and this and braided hair and whatever the case might be. Rather, let it be all of these spiritual things. Let that be your adornment. So what is going on here? Is it talking against jewelry in principle? No. It's not. It's talking against the specific attitude that people have and associate with jewelry. There was nothing. So, for example, let's make an example. The woman represents the church, and the church the temple. Was the temple adorned? Yes or no? The temple was adorned fabulously. There no structure ever was so fabulous like the temple that Solomon built for the Lord. Right? And all of that ornate, all of that stuff that is ornate, all that finery represents characters. All of these jewels and things like this, they represent something. It's not just about the material. The error comes when we start treating it like it's all about the material rather than what the thing represents. And when we start using the material in a narcissistic way, you see, the problem is not the material itself. The material itself, it's irrelevant. Right? Does it not say that to find a good wife is better than finding jewels and things like this, right? Because yes. So there's that internal adornment, right? So here Hezekiah, right? Babylon comes to him. What does he show him? He shows him the material stuff. What should he have shown the Babylonians? He should have introduced them to his God, to his theology, to righteousness, to all this stuff. Instead, and all of this stuff symbolized something. Rather than teaching him about the exalted things, he focused only on the material things. And God says to him that one day, these things are going to be taken away because these precious objects have become a stumbling block to you. And it's the same reason why God then did that later on in Israel, where they had to take the things off and, pay the temple. They used their stuff to build an idol. They took their earrings and stuff to build an idol. It's like these things have become a stumbling block to you. You've forgotten what these things are meant to represent. It's not against the jewelry itself. It's what we're doing with them. Because here's the problem. If the problem was the jewelry itself, then why is God giving us crowns filled with precious stones when we go to heaven? Because this is the thing, right? He says, oh, it'll be such hypocrisy. An atheist will simply turn around and say, well, then God is a hypocrite, because on earth he tells you, oh, you're not allowed to wear jewelry because jewelry is evil. But then when you get to heaven, he gives you a crown, right? With a golden crown with all these jewels and stuff like this. And he's got a city that is the streets of gold and freaking, you know, right? It's because it's what these things mean something, right? And the fact of the matter is, if it's a stumbling block to you, yeah, stay away from it. Absolutely, stay away from everything that could cause you a stumbling block, for sure. But don't now come think that it's because that evil lies in the object itself. The evil is in you. The evil is in you, and you can be narcissistic and arrogant whether you are jeweled up or not. And this is what it's trying to tell people, right? And this is the mistake. This is where these people are becoming legalistic and becoming like the Pharisees, right? Sort of thing, like the Pharisees when the Bible says, oh, keep the law in your hearts and on your foreheads and stuff. They went and they literally wrote the 10 Commandments down in little wooden plaques and tied it to their wrists and tied it around their forehead. So this is the same kind of stupidity. It's a complete obsession with the material thing, rather than the spiritual message and the point of the things behind it. Right? Yeah, if you're going out and you're showing off and all these kinds of things, yeah, then don't do that. Right? Yeah, but you need to have this internal treasure first, the treasure of character, the treasure of personality, and all these kinds of things. And people fail, man, like, you know. But this is the point, right? This is what the Bible is trying to convey. Don't adorn yourself with this garbage. You know, what are you doing that for? Right? What are you doing that for? And you're neglecting. And do we see this today? We see this today. Every single idiot, like half the people on YouTube, all of the Hollywood people, all that kind of stuff, showing off all kinds of things and stuff like that, you know, absolutely ostentatious, but they're narcissistic they're narcissistic and they're psychopathic as anything. And if you look at the psychological literature, you see very clearly narcissism is becoming rampant, left, right, and center. It's one of the biggest problems in psychology these days, is how do we deal with the absolute massive spread of narcissism? But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Do you know what else can be done narcissistically? Is this same people, just like this guy, will go and buy an expensive suit in order to be seen at church in his expensive suit or his nice suit. Suits are allowed. Right, by the way, suits are allowed. Suit and tie is allowed. It's not unnecessary, but it's allowed. Not only that, but the arrogance of the Western mind, because they will look down if someone else from a different culture wears whatever is considered respectable in front of God, according to their culture, and say, oh, well, you know, they should be wearing a suit. They arbitrarily privilege the European way of dressing to show respect. Sort of thing. It's narcissistic. Why should I privilege the European way of dressing rather than the African way of dressing or the South American way of dressing? Why should I, or the Arabic way of dressing in the robes or whatever the case might be? Why should I privilege one over the other? But all of these type of people, they will all be at church preening with their sharp little haircuts, right? Kind of thing, like it was done with a protractor, sort of thing, with their suits all and preening and nose turned up at people like this guy did with me when I was this raggedy, scraggly, new pagan new ager who didn't know his ass from his elbow, right? That came to the church, and all I wanted to do was thank this guy for showing me the light and helping me to come to Christianity. And he looked, and the only thing he saw was the way I looked, man. He was utterly blind to the change that had just happened in me. The only thing that he could see was the way I was dressed. And this is exactly the problem. This is exactly the problem. Now, I'm not making excuse. Of course, you're supposed to dress properly to go to church. I'm not saying, this is not what I'm saying, right? Go dress however you want. No. You are going to be before the presence of the Lord, so dress properly. But what I'm talking here is about an obsession about the wrong thing. is about the wrong thing, right? And it's the Protestant, because Protestants took on the rationalism, right? The ideological rationalism where everything must have this formula and we must make lists of what we do or do not do and all that. It's legalism like the Jews. It's the same thing. And it's resulted in sterile, ugly, sterile churches that no one wants to go into. We know. I mean, in the Bible, we have examples that the sanctuary was adorned, was beautiful, right? You would walk into a temple and you would be filled with awe. Man, I'm in the house of the Lord. You don't feel that in Protestant churches today. They are ugly and sterile and boring. And this is the problem. Protestants are so obsessed with the wrong thing. Not only do they fail entirely to adorn their sanctuary with anything meaningful, ironically, they're not even adorning their own personalities and characters with the things they're supposed to be in adorning, because there's a complete absence of spiritual practices within Protestantism. Right? You have your born again experience, you get baptized, and now you're done. Right? They give lip service to the spiritual practices and stuff like that, but they don't do anything. All they do is legalistic nitpicking on whether you should eat 3 peas or 4 peas, or whether you should wear a silver ring or a gold ring, or or should you braid your hair like this or like that? Should a man have long hair or short hair? This is literally the kind of arguments, almost to the exclusion of everything else. I know Seventh-day Adventists are one of the worst, sort of thing. The deep truths of the Bible are almost never addressed. The people in the Seventh-day Adventist church, ladies and gentlemen, are starving for deeper truths, right? But all they get is a diet of veganism, of legalistic. Should I clap in church? Should I not clap in church? Should I wear rings or not wear rings? Should I cut my hair long or short? How many millimeters is too long my hair? That kind of nonsense. They get prophecy, not that these things are bad in and of themselves, but there's like 5 different topics, and that if you can go on any Seventh-day Adventist thing anywhere, they deal with like 5 different topics, and that's it, nothing else. They're starving for more. So, and this is the kind of rubbish, this is the kind of garbage that they focus on, and they lose the beautiful meaning of what it is to recapitulate the Trinity within the holy matrimony and what the ring is meant to symbolize. The ring on the right hand, what that's meant to symbolize, the richness of the meaning there. I have not conveyed even a little bit of it. I've just given you a taste of what it's meant to mean, right? Because there's not a lot of time. I mean, this video is getting almost 2 hours now, right? Sort of thing. Marriages are falling apart as much in the Adventist church as anywhere else. Do you think if people really had this meaning that there would be such a problem? No, it's ridiculous. But anyway, I digress. Sort of thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this helps. Right? Stop letting people push you around with and derail you with stuff like this. Don't use this as an excuse to be narcissistic and to go and wear jewelry and stuff like that and waste money and things. This is not an excuse for that, right? People fall in 2 extremes. I'm saying being balanced and understand what these things are supposed to mean, rather than focus on just materialism all the time. That's the problem these days. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope this helps. God bless.